I think that what we're going to see over the next 4 years is Israel imposing its final solution on Palestine, because they're like, this has gone on long enough. We have a president in the White House who will literally do whatever he's told.
Now you really see it. You really see how a bunch of Western guys somewhere in their offices in a rich capital are just playing for God. Are literally just, oh, we're gonna move them out to Jordan. We're literally just playing for God and moving out people, millions of people who have lived there for thousands of years. It's so extreme if you think deeply about it. What kind of mindset has developed in colonial societies that we have come to a stage where human beings just decide for other human beings, millions of them who have been for thousands of years on their indigenous lands, to just move them or kill them all.
And the whole world, all the colonizers of the world see themselves in the Israelis, and all the colonized see themselves in the Palestinians. You see that everywhere, whatever part of the world. That is the divide psychologically, and in terms of solidarity, which is why the whole global north is basically supporting Israel, and has Europe and America has supported Israel. So I think the multipolar world is inevitable. I think China's going to lead it, and I think that's. I mean, making no comments uh, on on the Chinese government, which has different good things about it, but also is repressive and authoritarian. I think it is the best hope for humanity, just on a structural level, because that's the only game in town when it comes to having a truly a deterrent in place against U.S. imperialism, effectively.
All right. Hello, everyone. We are again today with our good friend Matt. I think I recognize his shirt. Not sure, but I think I recognize it from last time. But
Yeah.
anyway, good to see you again, Matt. Thanks for coming on again. And we wanted to talk to you a bit about the situation that's going on right now in West Asia. I saw a couple of very good interviews of yourself, and also a conference where you were with Feinstein and Khalili and Corbyn, and you were sharing a stage. I can advise everybody to go to check out that conference. Really good, I must say. I very much enjoyed that. Good vibe also between the four of you. And I heard you say something, and I found it very interesting. I think, hey, that's worthy of talking to Matt about. And that is that you said two things. You said, one, Trump is probably going to be worse for West Asia, or in particular the Palestinians. That's number one. And I think that's an important point to discuss because everybody is talking about that stuff. And number two, you said Iran is going to get hit. He said, now it's going to happen. You also highlighted what often people forget. You also highlighted the murder of Qasem Soleimani
Yeah.
by Donald Trump. Let's not forget that. So my question is, Matt, can you elaborate a bit on how you evaluate now the Trump's in office? Because I also remember our last conversation where you said that you think the tail wags the dog. Sorry. Well, yes, you actually thought
Yeah.
that the Zionist lobby is actually more powerful of controlling what the U.S. government does instead of the other school of thought of people who say
Mm.
no, it's the United States. But then we see Trump come into power, and suddenly there's a ceasefire. And everybody is saying, like, you see, and America is super powerful and they will listen immediately. But you said something very interesting, and I think I agree with you. You said probably there was a backroom deal with Netanyahu and Trump that
Mm.
actually let this happen, and something much worse is maybe going to come. Before I talk too much, can you elaborate a bit on all these
Well,
things?
yeah. So, as I said in that conference, when um when that ceasefire happened, which happened, of course, the day before Trump was inaugurated. Obviously, I was happy, but I was deeply suspicious because Trump. does not care about how many Palestinians die. He's just been talking about moving them all out of Gaza. So what? But he wanted a ceasefire because he didn't want it to carry on into his administration. And number two, he wanted to be able to say, well, look, I negotiated a ceasefire after Biden did nothing for 15 months. So it was good for him, right? But Netanyahu and him must have talked and discussed that because of the timeline. Now, what did Netanyahu? What did Trump promise Netanyahu in exchange for doing that ceasefire on that Sunday? And I think probably he promised him a lot. You know, he probably said maybe what he's been saying in recent days, that we're going to move the population of Gaza out of Gaza. He's probably said we're going to go harder on Iran, which is he's already announced, by the way. He's already said they're going to go back to their maximum pressure stance of the previous administration. And he probably, those two are the main things, but he probably made promises about the West Bank as well, because one of the first acts of the Trump administration was to get rid of sanctions on extremist settlers in the West Bank as well. So, and so all that makes me think, yes, he's going to be a disaster for the Palestinians. We also have evidence from his first term as well, because Trump has been president before, and his first term showed he was one of the most, maybe the most pro-Israel, I should say pro-Israeli extremist president since it was founded. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem, which was highly controversial and a violation of international law. And he backed the Israelis while they were massacring Palestinians at the same time, contemporaneously with the opening during the Great March of Return, which was a horrific crime, by the way, that people has largely been forgotten. But that was one of the most affecting emotionally experiences I've had of recent years, even including the genocide. You know, all these Palestinians that have been put in a prison by Israel, many of them descendants of refugees from the original founding of Israel, and walk into the prison gates peacefully, music, literature, all this kind of amazing stuff, and they were literally just mowed down by Israeli snipers. Horrific. And Trump supported all that, opened the embassy, and as you mentioned as well, and murdered Soleimani in Iraq in 2020, probably at the behest of the Israelis. And that was an act of war against Iran. You can't kill a top general in the Iranian military in a second country and that not be a declaration of war. You know, if Iran killed a top US general, the US would say we're at war now. Anyway, so those two things, knowing those two things, I just think that something big is coming. The third part of it also is Netanyahu knows that Trump is only in power for 4 years, right? Because he can't do that unless he changes the constitution. He can't run again after the end of this term. And he has October 7th as his kind of pretext for whatever he wants to do. He sees it as his 9/11 moment. He went to meet mayors in the south of Israel a day or so after October 7th, said, stay steadfast, we're going to remake the Middle East. And now he's got 4 years of Donald Trump, who's basically just in his pocket. So he wants to get everything done that he's wanted to do for decades, and the Israeli Likudniks have wanted to do for many decades. And effectively, what is their grand plan? They want to dispose of the indigenous population. This has been a problem which has been going on since 1948, but even before that. You know, how do you dispose of an indigenous population when you want to build your country, your settler colony on top of them? So I think it's going to ratchet up massively, and I think that Trump keeps saying, I don't know if the ceasefire will hold, blah blah blah. But if you and the other point which I'll finish on is just look at the personnel that Trump has appointed. They're all Israel nuts. They're more nuts than even the Biden lot, like Steve Winkoff. Mike Huckabee is the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Mike Huckabee is just insane. He's off the charts. Christian Zionist. So that kind, and then he invites Netanyahu, who's wanted by the ICC for war crimes and crimes against humanity, as the first foreign leader to visit him at the White House. So what kind of picture am I painting? It's one that doesn't look good for Palestine, does it? Of course, the important point and the more hopeful point is they have a plan, but they won't always be in control of what's happening on the ground. And I don't think that their plan's inactable because even I think the Israelis' plan after October 7th, as I mentioned, Netanyahu wanted to get all this stuff done. I think their plan was to depopulate Gaza, definitely northern Gaza. Uh, they had this corridor just south of Gaza City. I think they wanted to depopulate the whole of it. Jabalia camp, there was a massive extermination campaign there a couple of months ago where they got rid of phone signal and stuff, and they just wiped out hundreds and hundreds of people. But the Palestinians didn't move. They didn't move. They were still there. There was still 500,000 Palestinians in northern Gaza at that point. So how, even if Trump says we want to move everyone to move, how do you get them out? Even if you started another genocide, they might not move. Now they would say, well, now this time round they'd open the Rafah crossing, which is true. If the Rafah crossing had been open during a genocide, how many Palestinians do you think would have left? It's an open question. I don't know. Definitely some, because people want to save their kids and don't want to die. But there's also hundreds of thousands that might not have, and also hundreds of thousands that have been told to move from northern Gaza that refuse to go to the south. So I don't know if they'll be able to enact their plan how they want it. And also the other point is on the West Bank. Now I think their final status, how they want to do it, is just annex the what's called Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank that Israel basically controls, and then leave these three little non-contiguous Palestinian bits. So they'll probably do that in the. I mean, the top goal would be to just depopulate the whole of the West Bank and move them all to Jordan, but I don't think they'll be able to do that. But annexing Area C will probably happen as well. I think that what we're going to see over the next 4 years is Israel imposing its final solution on Palestine, because they're like, this has gone on long enough. We have a president in the White House who will literally do whatever he's told, and has no moral scruples about any of it, what we do to the Palestinians. So yeah, I don't think so. And then the argument against it is what you said, was well, look, Biden oversaw a genocide for 15 months and then Trump's ended it, which is true. But I don't think that really outweighs all the evidence I've just put forward about what Trump means for Palestine. I think that the ceasefire was basically a result of Trump's own self-interest, and actually probably in the long term Netanyahu's self-interest, because he's going to be able to do a lot of the things that he might not have been able to do under Biden. But that's just my take. I know that that's controversial. Well, not. There's a lot in the pro-Palestine movement that that might disagree with that, but that's just my take.
I don't even know if there would be so much disagreement. Like I've heard Ali Abu Niba's take, which I agree with to a very large extent. That the most important point right now is just that Biden, the supposed lesser evil, is undeniably the greater evil as of right now.
Yes, yeah,
Now, that as of right now is a pretty big qualification.
yeah,
But you also said something like, Trump's plans are going to run into reality head first. And
yeah,
that's my take as well, is that, when he blathers on, he talks, he says all sorts of crazy shit, and he only follows through on a small part of it, right? When
yeah,
he says, "Oh yeah, the US is going to own Gaza. We're going to move all the people out. We might use US troops." I mean, the idea of sending US troops, it's laughable. They start getting shot and killed. There's going to be a mutiny in the U.S. military. Trump's going to lose a lot of his support at home. He's not going to be able to do that, practically
yeah,
speaking, politically speaking. When it
mm,
comes to what, he's going to talk to one of his Gulf dictatorship buddies and say,
yeah,
"Hey, would you mind holding on to 1.5 million Palestinians?" They can't agree because they'll get overthrown. So,
yes,
it seems to me like reality is not going to allow the stuff that's coming out of his mouth.
yeah,
But on the other hand, all of the evidence you just provided about, what is this man's character, what is the direction of his administration with all of the people that he's brought in. Yeah, absolutely. Can't argue with that. That doesn't look good at all. But I would just say, nobody expected. I don't think anyone on the left expected that Trump would be
no,
good. It's just a
no,
matter of, is it possible that he could be less bad than Biden? And,
yeah,
if you look at it really cynically, ethnic cleansing is less bad than genocide.
Yeah.
not saying very much, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't really have a point. There's
No,
no
no,
like
I agree with you.
moral.
Yeah. And I also agree with Ali Abunima's point as well, and your point that yeah, Biden is the major criminal now. Like that, and all these liberals who are saying, well, this is what you get if you for saying don't vote for the genocide for the genocidal Biden Harris ticket, and it's sort of like no, what we have got so far is a ceasefire. And yes, lots of horrific things coming out of the mouth of Trump, but as you say, is he going to do them? Even US officials today were rowing back on what he said in the press conference with Netanyahu. So yeah, but the problem, I think, it's more Iran, because I think that if you look at the people around him and the fact that I think he is more willing to do mad stuff for Netanyahu. Netanyahu wants to get rid of Iran. Like they want that. That is their obsession and has been for years and years, and the neocons as well. And Trump's already, like as I said, has this record with Iran. He got rid of the Iran nuclear deal in his first presidency at the behest of Israel, and he killed Soleimani, and now he's talking about maximum pressure, and Israel's constantly wanting to launch a full scale attack. And if you listen rhetorically to what Netanyahu and his buddies say, everything they always say about Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis is always related back to Iran. They're trying to prime the population for a full on attack on Iran, and I think it will happen. I mean, obviously, I might be wrong. I hope I am wrong. But they wanted to do Iran after 9/11. Ever since 1979, it's been an obsession, and the hostage crisis and stuff. I just got a sinking feeling that it's going to happen. I don't know, but again, it's like you said, it's like it will hit reality. The reason they haven't done it up to now, partly, is because it would create such carnage for the US, and it would be worse than Iraq in terms of, like, Iran is a fully functioning military power, and might be able to, like, really do damage to the United States if it invaded on the ground. So whether his people in the Pentagon will say it's not happening, or if he overrules them, that's an open question. I just feel like that the whole of the weight of the Israeli state, and therefore the US state, is pushing towards an attack on Iran. And they've been bombing Iranian backed rebel Houthis in Yemen. The British and the Americans have, and the Israelis, for a year basically, and now they've got this new regime which seems to like them in Syria. So the whole timeline is just funny. I don't know what you guys think about the Syria thing, because the HTS offensive happened literally hours after the ceasefire agreement had been signed between Hezbollah and Israel. It was almost like it was like a domino. They were like, right, we'll kill Nasrallah, get the ceasefire, then we'll get Assad gone, and then finally go to Iran. That's what it seems like to me, anyway.
Yeah, it reminds me of conversations we had with Kevork Almashan. He is a presenter of Syriana Analysis and a friend of the show, and he says the same as you. He's convinced that this HTS is part of the imperial system, Israel and the United States, and this whole overthrow. This was all concocted, so to speak. You know what what strikes me, what really, like, how can I say that in English? I have the Dutch word in my head. What really, well, strikes me, I can let's put it that way, in these in what is happening now in Palestine, is, when you read about colonialism and you read about back in the day what happened, carving up countries and stuff, and you already knew, like, okay, that was terrible what happened. But now you really see it. You really see how a bunch of Western guys somewhere in their offices in a rich capital are just playing for God. Are
Yeah.
literally just, oh, we're gonna move them out to Jordan. We're literally just playing for God, and moving out people, millions of people who have lived there for thousands of years. It's so extreme if you think deeply about it. What kind of mindset has developed in colonial societies that we have come to a stage where human beings just decide for other human beings, millions of them who have been for thousands of years on their indigenous lands, to just move them or kill them all. It's
Yeah.
just so baffling if you think about it. It's not really a question, but I don't know
No,
if
I
you
think that it's.
ever reflect on that.
I think it is interesting because I think it's partly there's obviously many elements to why the United States gives such loyal support to Israel, but I think part of it is the similarities in their history. Like United States is a settler colony. It was established with Jamestown. What was 1607 in North America, and then they expanded westwards and basically wiped out a lot of the indigenous population, put the rest onto reservation, tricked them into signing treaties. Uh, it was horrendous what happened, but they did what Israel wants to do, which is like completely destroy the ability of the indigenous resistance. There was a lot of resistance to the British takeover of the land, but effectively they lost and they were destroyed and they were put onto reservations and they basically lived in misery up till now. And Israel, this is what is quite interesting what you said. Like that's the interesting about Israel. It's like you're watching history. Like you kind of feel like when you read history books, you're like, well, that was a past time. You know, when we read about the genocide of the Native Americans or what the British did in Australia or whatever, you're like, but Israel is currently doing that same thing, and it's the same project which has not reached its end. The question is, how does it end? Does it end like America and Australia, where you just have this like destroyed indigenous population that's 90% of it killed, and then the rest just live as, in misery? Or do you have like a Algerian scenario where there's a revolutionary war to kick out the settlers, and a million Pied Noirs had to leave in the end in Algeria? I don't know. I don't want to give false hope. I mean, Israel is, is a very powerful institution and country with nukes, obviously. So if there is going to be a liberation of all of Palestine from the river to the sea, a lot of people are going to have to die beforehand. But I don't. But what I believe is that that the mentality you're talking about is residual mentality from the time of the colonization of North America, and also in Britain, we were the ones that were sending all these settlers everywhere. You know, so we have a sort of philosophical connection with what Israel is. And that's what, and the whole world, all the colonizers of the world see themselves in the Israelis, and all the colonized see themselves in the Palestinians. You see that everywhere, whatever part of the world. That is the divide psychologically, and in terms of solidarity, which is why the whole global north is basically supporting Israel, and has Europe and America supported Israel, and the whole of the global south, the people, not the governments, have supported Palestine. And the other interesting variable is the extent to which governments are under the control of the U.S. empire. Because if you look at the governments which have been strident in rhetoric but also policy in terms of Israel and the genocide in Gaza, it's all, well, a lot of them are left governments in Latin America that are independent of the U.S. empire, like Gustavo Petro, like AMLO in Mexico, Luis Arce in Bolivia, to a degree Boric in Chile, but all the ones that are like signed up U.S. empire puppets like Javier Milei in Argentina, they all love Israel, and I think that's another important awakening that people have had about the world from the Gaza genocide. Is the role is that this is about an imperial system, a U.S.-led imperial system. Israel is a colony of the United States, effectively. That it couldn't operate without the United States. The United States is the key backer, and that understanding for a lot of people, because although there's a lot of propaganda about Zionism, the propaganda about US power is just so prevalent and so deep, and so many resources are put into it. So I think that watching what Biden's backed and enabled and facilitated over the past 15 months has changed the consciousness of humanity. I really do believe that. I'm not just saying that to sound a hopeful note. I think that people, because I'm not surprised by what you're saying, right? Which is that watching people like Biden and Keir Starmer just talk fine with genocide and watching kids' heads get blown off every day. But a lot of people, unlike us, who have been reading the mainstream media, who have been consuming the TV news, are like, what the hell is going on here? I've been fed all this shit, and now I'm watching Biden get up and send billions of arms to Israel, and I'm watching on my phone how they're like literally blowing up kids every day and targeting kids and starving them, and like people are shocked. Because that contradiction has never been as obvious as it is now. Thanks, I think, a lot to social media as well. You know, it's not the first genocide ever by far, but it's definitely the first live stream genocide, and the younger generation all consume it on their phones. So yeah, so what the shock you've felt, and it has been shocking to me, even though we know this stuff. Like, imagine that shock for someone who has no background that we do in how the world works and what US power is about. And I think like we need to strategize about how we take advantage of that on the left, and that awakening that is global, and move it forward, because we might not get another opportunity. Like I talk to people now at talks and stuff that I do at demonstrations and stuff, and old ladies come up to me and say, I read the Daily Telegraph. This is a right-wing newspaper in the UK for 50 years, and I've just been absolutely shocked. And I'm never going to read the Daily Telegraph again. And I'm now subscribing to and paying £10 a month to Declassified. And I'm like, well, that has happened many, many, many times. So we need to. I don't know. I don't quite know. I haven't thought about it too much, but we need to work out a way of taking advantage of that, because that something's happening. There's definitely something bubbling on the surface, and I don't think it's going to go away, or at least we shouldn't let it go away.
Yeah, amen. Amen. And maybe to tie that into what you were saying before about your worries about a war on Iran, which I share those worries. My thinking is they wouldn't be able to really pull that off unless they had some sort of violent attack that they can blame on Iran, and then, make that the casus belli.
Yeah,
But because of this awakening, and also because of internet media and this greater distrust of, government narratives and stories, and the dominant media's narratives and stories, there might be a chance to cut that off at the nub. Like, as soon
yeah,
as some event like that happens, that they try to blame, on Iran and say that's the reason why we need to go bomb and murder them,
yeah,
you know, jump on that. Yeah.
yeah. I agree with that. And also, I'm just reading Daniel Ellsberg's memoir at the moment. Actually, I'm not that far into it, but he's talking about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which kind of sparked the Vietnam War, or at least the active US role in South Vietnam. And he was just like, it's known that it was a fraud, but when you look into how the US government, like senior parts of it, knew how it was a fraud, and then were quite happy to use that, you're like, yeah, something like some false flag or some incident could be generated. But the other thing that was an interesting secondary consequence of what you're talking about, this awakening, and the fact that it could pose a threat to their ability to project power. And that's the really important thing for them. They don't mind. That's when it reaches a critical mass, when actually public perceptions could stop something that they want to do to project power. What you're seeing, I think, the countervailing trend is like massive increased repression in the West, especially over Gaza. You've seen it in the States, you've seen it in the UK. Like now, like journalists in this country, including really important ones like Asa Winstanley, have had their houses raided. Some have been arrested. Richard Medhurst was detained at Heathrow Airport for 23 hours in solitary, and then is now charged under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act, which carries up to 14 years in prison. Like, it's crazy what's going on here.
Ali Abunimah in Switzerland just now.
Ali Abunimah in Switzerland, but that is all a sign that that they are losing. They've lost control of the narrative on Gaza, particularly. So when you've lost control of the narrative on Israel, which is one of your most prized sort of propaganda coups, is to present this brutal settler colony as some kind of progressive ally. When you've lost that, the only resort you have is to use the law to discipline the population, which is getting out of line. And it's wild to see what's happening here. It's the same in the United States. Look what Columbia University did to its own students who were protesting against the government backing a genocide. This is levels of repression that you didn't even see in the Vietnam War. Obviously, there was the Kent State massacre, but I'm talking about like actually brutalizing the protesters with the police on campus, and actually they're getting sued now by some students. And now Trump's saying that he's going to revoke the visa of any student, foreign student who's in the United States if they voice pro-Palestine views. Insane stuff that is just massive, unconstitutional, wild. But this is a sign of desperation. The Israel lobby, which is kind of behind all these policies, and including the police raids, I think, which is even more worrying when you've got the police acting on behalf of a foreign state. But that's a different issue. But the reason they're clamping down so hard is they know that they've lost the control of the narrative, and I don't think they're ever going to get it back. But what that means is an erosion of our freedoms is underway and probably will continue to get worse. It's been an awakening for me because, like, you realize how frail our institutions are. Like, if they can be so easily dismantled by Israel, which is a small little country, and the police can basically just go on wild hunts for journalists based on no. In fact, the interesting thing about Asa, he wasn't even charged. So in this country, in the UK, you can have your house raided by the police, you can have all your equipment taken, and without even being charged. That's insane. I didn't even know that before that happened to Asa. I didn't know that was possible, but that is apparently possible under terrorism laws. So we're seeing all the it's like you said, we're seeing all the implicit and embedded repression and genocidal psychology of our societies having to expose themselves in this very, very horrific time. And I think I was saying this to Andrew Feinstein actually the other day before that talk, because he's brilliant. He served under Nelson Mandela. He was a whistleblower on an arms deal, and that's why he had to leave South Africa to come to the UK. But he's a brilliant investigator, MP, and politician. And I was saying to him, look, we need someone like you to lead a new party or something. And I don't think he's up for it at the moment. But I did, after I said that, I said, look, we have a responsibility now as a left, because if we don't step up, then really awful people are soon going to be in power, and awful people are already in power. But I'm reading a history of the Third Reich now, and one of the major takeaways is that there were so many mistakes made by the left and other elements within German society during the rise of Hitler, that actually it wasn't inevitable that they were going to take power, the Nazis. I'm not saying we're going to get someone like the Nazis, but like the conditions are right for fascism and for the far right to really take control of the gears of state. So if we don't step up as the left, we're going to have to explain that to our kids when we have these fascists in power. So yeah, we need leaders, though. I think I'll finish with this. I've got an unpopular take on history, which is I sort of subscribe to the great man theory of history, great man, woman. I'm not saying that like history doesn't have its own dynamics, and someone like Hitler there had to be certain conditions right. But the point is, and this is another takeaway from that book, is that it wouldn't have happened without Hitler. This is by an American journalist who was living in Germany during the rise of Hitler and through the Third Reich period, and he basically just makes it clear that he was such an extraordinary individual obviously very evil, but a genius, and this had this will to power that was just completely unusual. And he gathered all these people around him that he, although the conditions were right for fascism or whatever it was, without Hitler, it wouldn't happen. And I think that if you look at like movements in Latin America, you needed Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, you needed Evo Morales in Bolivia. Obviously, you need the movements as well, but you need this charismatic force that people can coalesce around and organize around. And we don't have that in the UK yet. But and even Trump, you know, Trump was a complete outlier. So I think we need a leader or leaders, and we need a new party in the UK. I don't know about what you think about the States, but
Everywhere,
everywhere,
all over the West. But I totally agree with you, Matt. I think that the whole one man theory or one woman theory is very important, and I think we need a good leader, a very charismatic one also. Who writes always about the Chris Hedges? Chris Hedges always write about that charismatic leader that really riles people up. The problem with that one man leadership theory or idea, the problem is on the right they always have the big capital behind them. So it's really easy for these people to rise. Even Adolf Hitler had capital behind him, and that's soup. I mean, if you look at all the right wing wackos that become big names, they don't even have the charisma of Hitler, but just because they have the money behind them, they become big. The problem with left wing charismatic leaders, they're there, but the problem is they either get completely destroyed in the media and in society, and if they get far, they get killed. And Hugo Chavez I would say, is a rare exception in that sense, that he survived for a very long time, and you don't even know why he eventually died. But let's not focus on conspiracy theories. But what I'm trying to say is that it's very unique for the left to actually break through, because you have the whole machine of capital against you. I've seen it in the Netherlands. I've seen the same thing as what happened in the UK. We had in the Netherlands a socialist. He became very popular. The moment the guy got too many votes, in concert, our whole media went like, this will destroy the Netherlands. It will, and they made like pictures on magazines and newspaper of him as a butcher with bloody face, and he will butcher our society. People started to believe that stuff, and eventually it just dropped. You know, all the votes dropped. And when you say about like how fragile our systems are, and I totally agree with you. I even think we have just lived in a fantasy. I don't think we ever lived in a very robust democracy, if you see how easily it's being destroyed.
Yeah, it's true.
But it always gets back to that old question that I have, and I think you have also discussed that, Matt, is about how do we deal with the overwhelming monetary power of the United States? So we had Michael Hudson on, and I really like listening and talking to Michael Hudson, because he is one of the few who actually talks about the dollar as the reserve currency and not what most people do. I also heard it on the conference. Most people focus on the dollar as a reserve currency, and that is a problem, and that countries need to get off it because the United States controls all the money servers and can cut countries off from trade, and that is bad for countries, and that is very risky. I wouldn't even say that's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that because the rest of the world is buying up dollars, the United States has endless amount of dollars to just fund imperialism. Fund 900 plus bases here, fund color revolutions there, fund terrorist and death squads there, fund vessels and corrupt politicians there, fund CNN, BBC, and all these other networks. They have so much money to fund imperialism. And my question, and that's why I always say, and Peter is more hopeful than me, as a left, how do we fight against that machine, man? Like, I feel very hopeless sometimes.
No, it's happening. There's a multipolar economic world being built. You know, the BRICS Bank, is a start. There's also been even before the BRICS Bank, um, ALBA, the trade alliance in Latin America between the left-wing governments there, which still exists. But the point is, you have to build alternative institutions because we're still living in the shadow of the ones that were built after the Second World War, primarily the World Bank and the IMF, which are arms of the US government. If you look at the voting rights of the IMF particularly, and they put a straitjacket on the rest of the world, and that works as long as the rest of the world doesn't have an alternative. So if you're in a monetary crisis and you need liquidity quickly, the IMF's where you go. But if you've got a BRICS bank that has a emergency lending capacity that you can go to, then you're not in that straitjacket anymore. And that's why China is now targeted by Washington, because they are creating the conditions that Western imperialism will be much harder to, well, will be much easier to fight. And you're also, you mentioned, well, I mentioned Hugo Chavez, and you mentioned him as well. There's an argument that that he and Evo Morales in Bolivia wouldn't have survived as long as they did without the rise of China and Russia, because it's not just economic as well. When you talk about like fighting imperialism, you need a whole infrastructure to fight it. So if you come under attack from Washington, you need to bring in like a sophisticated group of spies who know how to do counter espionage, or you need to bring in a military that will help you protect yourself. And that didn't exist after the end of the Cold War for a long time. Well, not for a long time, but maybe a decade and a half. And now it does exist. And look at the Cuban Revolution in 1959. If the Soviet Union hadn't been around then, there's absolutely no way that would have survived. No way. Not only just the military support or the military deterrent to the US, but also the economic support. And actually, when that support ended after the end of the Cold War, Cuba went through what is called this like bad times, and it showed that how much. So I'm quite hopeful. I think the multipolar world is inevitable and it's happening, and China can't be stopped. Economically speaking, it can be. The only worrying thing is the US is at this overwhelming comparative advantage in terms of the resort to violence. It's military, but economically, it's already, like you mentioned, everyone buying US dollars. The other side of that is China owns a lot of the US debt. That does give it some power over the US as well. So I think the multipolar world is inevitable. I think China's going to lead it, and I think that's. I mean, making no comments on the Chinese government, which has different good things about it, but also is repressive and authoritarian. I think it is the best hope for humanity, just on a structural level, because that's the only game in town when it comes to having a truly a deterrent in place against US imperialism, effectively. So you're seeing it, and also I have to say, I've been around the place looking at Chinese foreign policy when I've been in countries in Africa and Latin America, and this might change. But talking to government officials and whatnot, they say that the Chinese are not here for charity. They want to make money and they want resources. But if we don't do what they ask, they just move on to the next country. They move on to the next place. They move on to the next project. Whereas the US, if you're not doing exactly what you're told, Evo Morales told me this. He was like, if you don't do exactly what you're told, they'll take you out or they'll try and start overthrowing you. And that's a difference. Like Chinese imperialism or Chinese projection of power seems a lot more smart and conducive to stability as well. And also, they only have one overseas military base now in Djibouti. As you said, there's 800 or so of US ones. And also, by the same time in US rise to power, there was a lot more military interventions. You know, what this period is called Wilsonian idealism under Woodrow Wilson. There were so many interventions in Central America and China itself, the Boxer Rebellion, you know, and China hasn't done that. So I'm hopeful that hopefully their rise to superpower status, they will keep it as Pacific as possible, and obviously they're doing economic deals, but try and keep the military out of it, apart from for defense, which is what it should be. And we're told, the US calls the Pentagon a Department of Defense, which is a bit of a sick joke. But that I think that I wouldn't be too disconsolate if I were you. Like in the long term, I think that the US is waning massively, and also I think, interestingly, I'll finish with this. I think the biggest problem for the US establishment, the US imperial elite, is not external. Like, it's internal. That society is a tinderbox. It could go off at any time, and they're gonna. I think their main challenge is to try and hold together the domestic society in the face, because also you've had like 40 years of the working class just being hammered. I think their real wages have actually stagnated in the last 40 years, which is unheard of in American history, and quite unusual in any history in the Western world. So there's all sorts of social problems, and Trump's obviously not going to deal with it, because he's now shuffling more money into the hands of the rich and the corporations. So you're going to have a society that is just or a population that's seen Trump as a lot of them see Trump as their only hope, and then when he fails, where do you go next? And then you could have, and then how many guns are there in the United States? Quite a few. So it's a dynamic situation. What was that? Was it a Chinese leader? Lenin said sometimes nothing happens for 10 years, and then 10 years happens in 2 weeks or something like that. I feel like we're in that period now.
Or something Mao said, all under heaven is chaos, the situation is excellent.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, it was great talking with you, and I think it's good that we leave off on a somewhat hopeful or less depressing note. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Thanks for coming on again,
Well, it was
Matt.
great to chat to you guys.
Yeah.
Fight in the academy.
Hey Matt, thanks a lot. You have been very generous, our favorite journalist. So we keep following you, and we will refrain from asking you too soon again. But we will definitely in the future bother you again.
No, of course, it's a meeting of minds. I agree with nearly everything you guys have said.